So, I'm going to make another video talking about Mexico. And why am I going to be talking about Mexico again? Because now, an increasing number of Republicans in the United States in Congress are actually talking about wanting to launch American military intervention in Mexico to fight the drug cartels. So this year, 2023, has been a year where there's been an escalation of this kind of rhetoric from American Republicans. And I'll name some of those people like Dan Crenshaw of Texas, Michael Waltz, Florida, even Marjorie Taylor Greene from Georgia, Senator Lindsey Graham of South Carolina, and so forth, have been calling for trying to launch American military operations in Mexico against the drug cartels, to label the Mexican drug cartels terrorist groups, and then use the authorization of military force against terrorism that was passed back in 2001 to then launch American military operations and airstrikes, drone strikes, and so forth on the drug cartels in Mexico. This rhetoric has really heated up following when 4 Americans were kidnapped this year in Mexico. 4 Americans, and 2 of them were killed, and they're kidnapped by a drug cartel. And this has really escalated this kind of rhetoric. Along with that, a lot of growing mistrust between the United States and Mexico because of more high-profile people in the Mexican government who have been caught in drug trafficking, which is not a surprise, such as former General Salvador Cienfuegos and also the former Minister of Public Security, Genaro Garcia Luna, who is now a convicted criminal in the United States who worked with the Sinaloa cartel. It would be a really crazy, bad idea for the United States to start sending in the military into Mexico. The Mexican president, AMLO, Andrés Manuel López Obrador, has already stated he would not accept the U.S. military coming into Mexico. So I want to name a lot of things that can go wrong if the United States really did do something like this. So why don't I name some of the things that can go wrong with this? Well, first off, there'd be a lot of death. So if the United States military were to go into invade Mexico, first off, the Mexican government would probably call it an act of war, and it could turn into a war between the U.S. and Mexico altogether. And there would be destruction on both sides of the border. Mexico does have an air force, and they could bomb targets in the United States, in California, and Arizona, New Mexico, Texas. And then there's a lot of Americans living in Mexico who would probably get killed in retaliation if the United States military were to invade Mexico. That's right, there's a lot of Americans living in Mexico, and they would be targets for violence. It would be a bloodbath. There'd be a lot of Mexican civilian deaths. If the United States really tried to fight all the cartels at once, these drug cartels are very powerful. They're well armed, and they could easily blend in with the rest of the population and do a guerrilla war. So how would that even be winnable for the United States? The U.S.-Mexico border would be an even worse situation than it already is if there was a war between the United States and Mexico. Also, we have to talk about the economics. The United States and Mexico are major trading partners. They're neighbors. And there is a lot of American companies who do business in Mexico. For example, American car companies like Ford and General Motors have car plants in Mexico. So already we are dealing with a car shortage in the United States. And if those car factories in production, for example, they would be affected by some sort of American war with Mexico, that's going to just shoot everyone in the foot. How would it help anyone? And lots of other trade and business that we do with Mexico, there would be no gains at all from it. It would drain the United States economically, with lives. It would also drain Mexico. It would be a mess that just could not be fixed. I also want to bring into the conversation foreign intervention that could be involved in this. If it really turned into a war between the United States and Mexico, China and Russia could get involved and be sending weapons and arms to Mexico and fighting against the United States, and it could really become a long, protracted war, and the United States would end up in the same situation that the Russians have been in Ukraine, and the Russians be wanting to get payback on the United States. So after America's really bad losses in Afghanistan and Iraq, why go into a war with Mexico? Also, speaking of Afghanistan, let's talk about their narcotics issue, because that's one of the excuses Republicans are making, wanting to destroy fentanyl and so forth production in Mexico. Well, the United States completely failed at trying to eradicate the heroin and opium in Afghanistan after being there for like 20 years. That was always one of the excuses the United States made for wanting to occupy Afghanistan, was taking on the opium production. Okay, but the opium production in Afghanistan actually skyrocketed and boomed up following the 2001 invasion of Afghanistan by the United States. And the United States failed to make a dent. And there was a lot of corruption involved, not only with the Afghan government, but there's been times that Americans themselves participated in heroin trafficking in Afghanistan. Now, if we do that closer to home in Mexico, it wouldn't be a big surprise to see how much corruption would be happening with the United States. And, the war on drugs really is a failure and a disaster, and it hasn't worked. And going to war with Mexico is not going to help it. No one is learning anything. So, anyone who wants to try to say, oh, the Republicans and conservatives are now anti-war and so forth, no, they're not. While they might be increasingly against this helping Ukraine and so forth in the Russia-Ukraine war, they're definitely in favor of wanting to go to war in Mexico. So the MAGA Republicans have failed to shed those neoconservative legacies of just this hawkish foreign intervention, going to war nonsense. And it'll never change, because war is big business for these people and the defense industry. But are the American people themselves waking up? I hope. After me and other people making these videos, more people are waking up.